College football has seen a lot of change over the recent years, especially in the last few years. We've seen realignment create super conferences of varying strength and geographic sense. And a part of this realignment is the ascension of a few FCS programs to the FBS level. Sam Houston State and Jacksonville State made the move to Conference USA in 2023, with Kennesaw State following their lead in 2024, and Delaware and Missouri State rounding out the room this year in 2025. UC Davis, while not an FBS member, definitely has that road open to them by becoming a non-football member of the reeling Mountain West. Realignment is continuing to spin, especially with Conference USA in the Mountain West, and I zero in on two more schools. Sacramento State, whose failed dalliance with the Pac-12 leaves them as an FCS independent unless they can convince an FBS conference to take them after all, and Tarleton State, who was just in D2 5 years ago but is rapidly rising in the realignment talk space. That's not including the Dakota schools, who are almost constantly brought up for potential FBS expansion. But I've done these thought processes before. I've looked at potential MAC additions and FCS move-ups. And at least for Conference USA, I was right at the time, and they added Delaware and Missouri State soon afterward. But it always begs the question, especially now, who will the next FBS school be, and which conference will they join? We have yet another Deluxe spreadsheet video. We'll be taking a look at a handful of different factors. Let's start with the most obvious, cash in the bank. Notably, Delaware made the move from the FCS to Conference USA off the back of anywhere from a $34 million to a $60 million athletics operating budget, immediately making them one of the more ready-to-compete schools in the conference. The more money your school has from the outset, the more likely they are to continue to make even more money, and make your conference more money as well. Next up is success. How good are you on the field? You'd think national championships would mean a lot to conferences, and to a certain degree, they do. But each of the last few teams to move up to the FBS in Sam Houston State, Jacksonville State, Kennesaw State, Delaware, and Missouri State only have one recent FCS national title to share between the five of them, with Sam Houston's title in 2023. James Madison is the clear exception to the rule when it comes to national title success, but that came on the back of regular season success as well. That's why I'm only looking at regular season winning percentage for each of these programs to see how consistently good each team is, especially considering none of them are sniffing the FBS's national title game anyway. After that, we're looking at attendance numbers. In the past, I've looked at facility capacity as a benchmark, but capacity hardly means anything if you can't fill up those seats. Each of the 5 FCS teams that joined Conference USA did fairly well in terms of average attendance the year before they joined, with the lowest of them, Kennesaw State, only appearing as small as it is because they play in an 8,000 capacity stadium in the first place. In the same vein as average attendance is the media market. This may not be the 1990s clear through the early 2010s where schools were added to conferences just because they were in a large media market. Ask yourself if Rutgers and Maryland feel like Big Ten teams yet. The answer's no. But despite us existing in the streaming and brand power age, media markets still do carry some meaning. The lowest market added to Conference USA was Missouri State in the Springfield media market, which, according to Nielsen ratings, is the 74th largest of 210 media markets in the United States. Sam Houston's in the Houston media market, which placed 6th, Kennesaw State is in the Atlanta market, which placed 7th, and Delaware's in the Philadelphia market, which placed 5th. While it isn't the most valuable factor, it still has some value, especially to a conference looking to expand their conference footprint. To help turn these metrics into point scores, I modified and weighted each team's results based on how important those metrics are. For revenue scores, I took each team's revenue, divided it by 1 million, and then multiplied it by 5, since I felt like it was the most important. Then I took each team's overall winning percentage, multiplied it by 100 to get a full number, and then multiplied it by 4. I took average attendance, divided it by 1,000, and multiplied it by 3 as the third most important metric. Market was a little weird. I took the total number of markets, 210, and subtracted the team's rank from that number. For example, Stony Brook is in the New York City market, which is the number 1 market, so for them, I took 210 minus 1, divided the resulting number by 10, and multiplied by 2. In total, for the final score, I took each score, multiplied them together, and divided the result by 1 million. Now, I am absolutely sure that this is not the best way to determine, numerically, the best possible school for an FBS conference to look at adding, but I do think it's an effective, albeit crude, start to determining a rough base value for each school. So now that I have a method, I need to get a group of schools together. I've done this a few times, specifically with my MAC expansion candidates video. Shout out to Bobcat Corner 035, by the way. So there are a few schools I wanted to take another look at, specifically in the Northeast. I gathered 17 schools that are commonly brought up as expansion candidates to take a look at for this thought experiment. Now, you might notice there are some schools here that I'm not looking at. There's a Dakota-sized hole in my lineup of schools, and that's on purpose. I've already made a video entirely focused on why I think the Dakota schools, specifically North Dakota State and South Dakota State, won't make the jump to the FBS anytime soon, if at all. Long story short, it's not exactly as financially viable for them as you'd think. But there are some other FCS programs I'm not looking at. Villanova, for another, isn't included on this list. The Wildcats were once seriously considered for Big East football membership back in the early 2010s, but couldn't commit to renovating their stadium to fit FBS requirements, so they fell by the wayside. The football-playing branch of the Big East totally dissolved a few years later, so it was all for naught anyway. I still think the Wildcats would make a great FBS program, but it just doesn't make sense for them to leave the lucrative Big East behind just because their football program could handle it. They're in a similar situation to UConn, but while the Huskies are looking at the Big 12 or ACC, Nova might be capped to looking at the American, MAC, or even worse, Conference USA. I also didn't include schools like Illinois State, William & Mary, Richmond, Weber State, and Southern, which could very easily have been on this list. William & Mary and Richmond, both schools in Virginia, I struggle to see whether a conference like Conference USA, which already has Liberty, or the Sun Belt, who claims both Old Dominion and James Madison, would be interested in adding. The only other option is the MAC, who I don't think would be willing to add a school in Virginia. Like any good high school experiment, we need to start with a hypothesis, and I can't do a video like this without thinking about the West. The West has been an area of the United States that has been largely ignored in FBS expansion throughout recent years. The last team from the West to move up to the FBS was Boise State in 1996, and I'd say the Broncos have done pretty well for themselves in the time since. There's a lot of reasons for that, one being that there are just simply more larger colleges east of the Mississippi River than there are west of it, but Sacramento State has made a lot of noise in their gamble to jump straight from the Big Sky to the Pac-12, a gamble that has not paid off. Now, the Mountain West, a conference now reeling from the Pac-12's sudden resurgence, is in desperate need of adding a few more programs, but I believe they made potentially the smartest move they could have by adding UC Davis, Sac State's rival just a few miles across town. Now, the Aggies weren't added as a football member, but it's pretty clear to me that the Mountain West added them for all other sports so they could ease into conference membership. Their current stadium seats just over 10,000 fans, but plans are out there to expand to 30,000, which would put them square in the range of other Mountain West teams. My hypothesis is that they are the best possible school for the Mountain West to take, with Tarleton State and Montana being close afterward. The Texans are rapid risers in terms of expansion, having just been a D2 school a few years ago, but already have a 20,000 plus capacity stadium and sit in the valuable Dallas media market. Montana doesn't have a great media market and is in a tiny state in terms of population, but has a 25,000 plus capacity stadium and one of the most storied traditions in FCS football. But now the fun part. Let's crunch some numbers. Here are a few interesting things that come to mind when going through these numbers. I got my athletics department revenues from Knight Newhouse data, and I focused on 2024, which is the most recent, most complete set of data for any of these schools. I immediately found some pretty surprising results. I knew UC Davis had a significantly large revenue, but I didn't think it was $50 million right from the jump. But, lo and behold, Sac State was right on their heels with $43 million. Another couple of surprises on this list, Stony Brook with nearly $41 million in athletic department revenue, and Rhode Island with over $37 million in athletic department revenue. There weren't many surprises with all-time win percentages. Youngstown State is well known for being an absolute dynasty in the 90s, but how many of you knew that Eastern Kentucky and Albany had all-time winning records over 60%? Austin Peay's all-time record of around 37% is doing them a lot of harm, but if you've paid attention to the Governors over the last few years, you know that they're on a rapid upswing as a program. Unsurprisingly, Montana and Montana State have really high attendance numbers for programs that are pretty much out in the middle of nowhere. But the two HBCU programs I have on this list, Jackson State and Florida A&M, also have done a really good job of getting butts in seats. There might come a time where the Sun Belt or Conference USA might look to give the Rattlers a second chance at becoming the only HBCU in the FBS, and Jackson State has flourished even post-Coach Prime. And, yet again, Sac State has proven me a little wrong. Even with a subpar 44% win percentage all time, they managed to pull over 14,000 in average attendance last year. Now, we take a look at some media markets. There are some interesting ones in here. Tarleton State benefits from being in Dallas's media market, the fourth largest in the country. Stony Brook is in the NYC media market, the largest and most valuable market in the United States, but a market that doesn't care much for football. New Hampshire's in the Boston media market, which cares more for football than NYC does, but still not by much. After that, there's a pretty steep drop-off. UC Davis and Sac State share the Sacramento media market, and Austin Peay lays claim to Nashville, but there are more students on this list in the triple digits than single digits. At the bottom are Montana and Montana State in the 161st and 185th size media markets, respectively. But we tabulate the final results, and here's where we stand. At first, we have UC Davis, followed by Tarleton State, Sacramento State, Stony Brook, Jackson State, New Hampshire, Montana, Albany, Florida A&M, EKU, Rhode Island, Central Arkansas, Youngstown State, Chattanooga, Austin Peay, Montana State, and Stephen F. Austin. So I was partially right. UC Davis and Tarleton State in our top two, but Sac State coming in third, and Montana way down at seventh behind Stony Brook, Jackson State, and New Hampshire. Stony Brook makes their case for MAC expansion here, while Jackson State's poor financial profile doesn't knock them out of consideration from Conference USA. Stephen F. Austin should probably stop being considered for these lists. But that leads me into my next point. Which of these schools do I actually think are more likely to move up to the next level? Obviously, I think UC Davis's football team will eventually join the Mountain West, and Tarleton State is looking at going to either the Conference USA or the Mountain West. If I'm the Mountain West, I'm actually hammering the phone to get out in front of Conference USA to get the Texans. But are any of the other schools actually going to get any traction with other conferences? I zero in on Sac State here, specifically because most of their push and most of their money was tied into joining the Pac-12. Their request for FBS independence fell through, and now they're an FCS independent. I don't see the Mountain West adding them since they already have the better team in the Metro and UC Davis sitting in their back pocket. Pac-12 clearly doesn't want them yet, so their best option is probably honestly Conference USA, and their closest conference mate would be New Mexico State. I don't think they're very likely. The real shocker here is Stony Brook. A stone's throw from New York City wouldn't mean much to the conference I think would be interested in them, the MAC, but given the conference lost Northern Illinois, their westernmost member, and regained UMass to be their easternmost member, I think adding them alongside number 6 on this list, New Hampshire, and one of number 8, Albany, or 11, Rhode Island, to create an eastern wing would be a phenomenal idea. Montana underperforms here, mostly because of their terrible media market, but I do think they could compete in the Mountain West if given the same resources the rest of the conference already has. Seriously, do you honestly think they couldn't be at least as good as Nevada or Wyoming? I'm not sure about Jackson State or Florida A&M, but I do think they could potentially make great additions to Conference USA. I just don't think they're as likely of ads as Eastern Kentucky, who underperforms on a second straight FCS ranking from me. They're a lot better of an ad than the numbers would tell you, I promise. Now, Youngstown State, despite scoring so low, is an interesting one. Like I said before, there is absolutely no reason for the MAC to add the Penguins, even if they lose a school like Toledo or Ohio to the American, Mountain West, or Sun Belt. The MAC already suffers from being too Ohio-centric, among other things, and YSU wouldn't solve any of their problems. Now, they would be a great ad for the Conference USA, who would benefit from planting a flag in Ohio, especially with losing UTEP and Louisiana Tech to other conferences already. The last one I thought would do well but doesn't in this ranking is Chattanooga. The Chattanooga media market doesn't rank very high, coming in 86th. Austin Peay suffers a lot for their lack of football history. Don't look up their 1987 season. But with the right investments, I think they could also be on the shortlist. I'm very surprised at how low Montana State is. I figure with their recent success, they'd be right there with Montana, especially since they're both pretty low in the media market range. But Montana wins out due to their deeper FCS history. I guess I probably should have made the athletic success one be 5 years in the past instead of all time. All that being said, I really only think there are a few schools that are likely to be added here, mixing both their scores and the needs of nearby conferences. Obviously, I can project UC Davis to become a future all-sports member of the Mountain West, and Tarleton State will either join them or join Conference USA. After that, we get a little muddy. I do like Stony Brook's chances of being added to the MAC alongside New Hampshire, and I know they're ranked lower, but Montana to the Mountain West and Eastern Kentucky with Youngstown State to the Conference USA are moves that make a lot of sense to me. But if I had to guess, that's about as far as it goes. Conferences actually aren't as desperate to expand as we might think they are. Just look at my home conference, the Big 12, who didn't expand until it was already too late. But at the same time, experiments like this show that it isn't as simple as running numbers and finding the best option to expand. Sometimes the best options are staring you right in the face, like UC Davis. But past that, you have to make some concessions. Maybe they won't make you the most money at the start, or win the most games, or be in the right media market. Maybe expansion isn't the right choice at all. But regardless, the college sports world will keep changing, with or without you. Stay safe out there, guys. I'll see you next time.